My name is Bob Mason.
Where and when were you born?
I actually born in a hospital in Saskatoon. My folks lived in Radisson, but in 1919, which was yesterday.
So how old are you right now?
Oh, well, my birthday's on the 8th of May. I was born in 1919, and I imagine I'm 100 years old in 2019.
So your birthday's coming up, your big birthday.
Oh, yes.
Do you feel like you're almost 100 years old?
No, I kind of wish that I did feel a little bit older.
Why?
Because a fellow wants to be active. I think maybe we all want to be active. But I don't want to be old and retired. Although I have got a pastime.
Just tell me, sir, what branch of the service were you in during World War II?
Oh, I was in the infantry.
And what specific units were you in during your time overseas?
In the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders. In the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders of Toronto and what's the name of that other town? Hamilton. I like that. Toronto and Hamilton. They when I got to Manitoba, I was on a draft to go overseas in 1943, early on. But they took me off of the draft, for heaven's sake, and made me a corporal. And the guys that I had trained with all the way through, they went overseas, and some of them were killed on D-Day. And I should have been there with them. But no, I was a dang corporal saying left, right in Camp Challow, Manitoba. And that wasn't what I joined up for. What I joined up for was to be in the infantry so that you can look a guy right in the face and say, I shouldn't kill that guy. And you know you shouldn't. And you know that he is thinking the same thing about you. He doesn't want to kill you, except that crazy bunch of young brainwashed people that Hitler had at the start. They were only 16 years old or 20 years old, and the oldest of them would be 25. And they were crazy. They wanted to kill somebody, but then it was the ordinary guys that you didn't want to, but you wanted to be there, and so that people didn't say, oh, Mason was close there, but he never got quite there. But honestly, the infantry was the only place to be. The infantry is about a war. And a war is where guys fight with each other. And we didn't want to fight with each other. You wanted to meet a bunch of guys that maybe I was fortunate that way. Towards the end of the war, we were fighting against German soldiers that weren't a dang bit different than we were. They didn't want. They even Hitler's generals knew that they shouldn't carry the war on after Christmas of 1944. But he said, go ahead and fight and fight and fight and fight and fight. And the guys didn't want to. They actually, I understood at one time, his own generals were against him at one time. The only thing was that he killed some of his best generals who were against him, and wanted the Canadian and told the German army to keep fighting, fighting, fighting. And you don't want to fight. Not with men that are just exactly like you. When the brainwashed kids were done, and there was very few of them left, when the brainwashed kids were done, that was the thing that caused the doggone war, was the super race, the super race of Aryans. And I guess, do you think I'm an Aryan? I was in the 4th Division. The 4th Division, and there were 5 divisions in Europe at the time. And I was in the 4th. The Argyll and Southern and Highlanders were the 63rd Battalion. I was in C Company C Company and A Company quite a bit. I carried a radio on my back, and I was the signaller. I sent the message that I was always with the major or the colonel. And usually when the German soldiers when they saw a guy with a radio on his back, they knew that the major or the captain or whoever was with him. And so they shot him first. And good old me, I was laying face down on the ground. So they took great fun and joy in filling my radio full of holes. But nevertheless, you were in the war and you saw what the other fella, you knew dang well at that time, when I was there mostly, you knew dang well that the other guy didn't want to be there either. You were there and he was there, but why were we there? Well, each government had their own reasons, and some were good and some were not so good. But still in all, as people, there we were, for heaven's sake, fighting with each other.
And Mr. Mason, could you also tell me about the role of a signaller in combat?
Well, my job was to take orders from way back, from maybe 10 miles back, and I would send the messages from the very front fighting line back there to them. We were attacked one night. Well, no, we attacked one night. And I got up so close that I could hear the guys whispering to each other. The German soldiers were laying on the ground there, a few feet from me. I don't know how far away they were. But anyway, I could hear one guy whispering I could whisper, "Hey, France, hey, France." and on my radio worked, and they wanted me to send a message. And who was going to send the message? They're going to say, "Well, here I am," right? And they're going to drop something on top of you right away. So I just pressed the little switch. And when they reported back at headquarters, they said that I kept in touch with them at all times. Well, that was the only time that really counted, was when I pressed that doggone button. And then that was the biggest thing That was the biggest thing of the war that I figured at that time.
So what ended up happening in that incident? What happened? So you got so close to the Germans.
Well, do you want me to tell you? Well, we were at the foot of the dike. Well, foot of the dike up across the Moss River. They were at the top of the dike. And we had 27 guys start up that slope. And only 3 of them ever got to the top. And I was the only one that wasn't hit. For heaven's sake. And, no, what was it you asked, pardon me?
I just wanted you to tell me that story.
Well, we were laying on the old bricks and stones and broken. There used to be 2 houses there, but there was no house. There was only the basement when we were there. And honestly, at that time, that place had to be taken. And I'm not sure of this, but when there was 3 of us went up to that dike, that they hauled off, and I don't know what they did then. But the next group that went up there was nobody there. And they figured that I kind of figured that they figured that we captured the place. Well, that army, do you know anything about the tactics? That army was this side of the river. And they were all set to go south and meet up with, what do they call it, the Battle of the Bulge?
Yeah.
And the Battle of the Bulge was to come, if it had been successful, would have gone that way, right through cut the Americans off a little bit. And this one coming from the north, they would have cut the whole Canadian army off. And that was a terrible, terrible place. And when anybody asks me about the war, that was the worst place I think that we ever were. There were, they put a bit of a monument up there after the war was over. They said there were over 300 people killed there, and that I don't think that counted as German soldiers. I think there were quite a few hundred guys on about 10 acres. And it didn't seem. It was a terrible place to be, and it was a terrible thing to say to men, we're going to go up that hill. It was terrible for them at the top of the hill to say, when they come up the hill, we're going to shoot them down. And yet we're in that situation. What do you do?
What was this area known as?
Pardon me?
What was this area known as?
Oh, Kapellchivir. 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 And it was a ferry harbor on the Moss River, and all the German army at that time was at the other side, but the ferry harbor was at this side. And the ferry harbor went straight south on a pretty well grid road, what we'd call a grid road, into Tilburg, which was maybe 10, 12 miles south. But Kapellchivir, they was one of the worst doggone fights that they'd ever been in. And mind you, I never got there until the war was pretty near half over. But that was the first piece that we went into. I went in quite a few places after that, and I wasn't known for killing people. Some guys just killed them just for fun, or seemed to. I didn't want to shoot anybody, but I had to. Well, what do you do? The guy's going to kill you. But even right up to the last week, or the last couple of weeks, some of our most important men got killed, and they didn't need to be at all. They didn't need to be at all. And I just happened to be signaling with the guys when they got killed. And the general over there, he thought, what a great guy I must be. Baloney, he had no idea what I was like. As a matter of fact, when the colonel got killed, he said, burn the town. He said more than that, but he used language that you wouldn't use anywhere in any town. He said, burn the town. He figured somebody in the town had killed the colonel. It was a German soldier, all right, that killed the colonel, but it wasn't that people in the town, they just lost their town. It was maybe 1,000, I don't know how many people lived in that town. But they burnt the whole town. They sent flamethrowers in there from the headquarters of 4th Division, of which we were the 3rd Brigade. Well, I guess I could explain all that, but it'd take a long, long time. But anyway, there we were in a town that was all on fire. It was all on fire. Most of us gathered in one house, and in the one house, for heaven's sake, were 2 or 3 people. And one of the guys went over to their German men went over to the wall, and he took an old wooden pipe off the wall, and he handed me the pipe, and he said, every time you look at this pipe, he says, think of Friesauth burning. Friesauth was just burnt. Only one house left in the whole big town. And that man had his collar on. He was a preacher. He had his collar on backwards. And the pipe is outside the door in the window. That is one of the things in the window outside the door on the hospital here. Oh.
So, who gave the order to burn the town? If the colonel was killed...
Oh, well, no, the general, or the colonel was killed.
So, can you explain that?
Pardon me?
Could you just explain that one more time?
Well...
Just why the town was burnt in the first place.
Well, because the colonel... You see, our regiment, the Argyll and Southern Highlanders, we were responsible for taking the town. And we went up there, but they cornered us, a whole bunch of us, and they killed the colonel. And above the colonel, of course, is the brigadiers. They have the brigades, and above him is the general. And the big general had just come from Italy. And it was this was one of the favorite leaders of the time. To him, and he thought, seeing one of his favorite colonels got killed there, burn the town. So by golly, they did. And some of the men said that they heard that everybody was killed. And that wasn't right because there were still a few of us left in that house. But it was quite a to-do, all right.
Did you guys take part in setting the buildings on fire, or who set the buildings on fire?
Well, the brigadier, the general. The general is in charge, of course, but the brigadiers, the flamethrowers were another regiment, and the flamethrowers came into the town, blowing flame in this side and flame on that side into the houses as they drove down the streets, and that they were pretty near built like tanks. The flamethrowers, they threw the doggone flame 60, 70, 80, 100 feet. And there was no use trying to compete with them burning the town down. That was a sure thing.
Can you describe, what did the town look like after the flamethrowers got done with them?
We just watched the doggone town burn. And watched the red sky, 2 or 3 planes flew over. They saw the flames from a way off, I guess. And the whole sky was red with smoke. And the town was burning. The Germans had moved back. There we were. And we lost. We lost about 200 men after that. When we started down the Rhineland, the Rhineland is the land between France and Germany and Holland. And the Rhineland is the land that the Germans took over I understand, in the First World War. But a lot of the people on the Rhineland were German, and an awful lot of them were French. And they got along real good, I thought, together. As a matter of fact, we went into one place, this side of the Hawkwell Forest, and there were 2 great big kettles of stew on the doggone stove, and 2 middle-aged ladies standing there. And some of the guys that we were with made them eat the soup first because they thought it might be poison. They just had the kettles of soup there. They wanted the war to be somewhere else. It was 2 German women. They had 2 great big vats of stew to feed the guys as they were moving up. And they were German. And they lived there. And we were supposed to be right and everything. I kind of wonder if the war accomplished anything. Some of the best reports about technology I heard since then that are from Germany. Like even the USA got a whole bunch. Well, what was his name? What was the name that he had the most to do with landing the men on the moon?
Oh, Kennedy?
No, it was It was one of the captured German scientists.
Oh, von Braun.
Huh?
Yeah, von Braun.
Probably. No, dang it all. That isn't the guy I'm thinking of, but that's the Russians took a whole bunch of German scientists. The U.S. took a whole bunch. The Canadians took very few, I think. I don't know. And England might have taken a few, as a matter of fact. I think England was settled by the European people. years and years and years and centuries ago. An awful lot of we Canadian people whose parents came from England, maybe their great-great-grandparents came from Europe. I don't know. But I do know we were all men. And I know the way when you got hit, you bled. And I can get you pieces of paper where I can show you a quotation from a book where there was a bunch of German machine guns and the Canadians went in there and they got mowed down. And as soon as they got mowed down, the German stretcher bearers came out to help the guys that were wounded. The German stretchers came out to help the Canadian guys that weren't killed, the guys that were wounded. Well, talk about compassion, eh? I mean, I took a whole bunch of those prisoners, like we took prisoners of war, and I knew where attack headquarters was, and I took a whole bunch of them back, and they saw us from across the river, and they started to shell us, and the shells were dropping all over the place, and the guy said, and all of a sudden we could hear the whistling over. We know they were going to get the digging, so we all were laid down. There were about 40 or 50 of them. And I was by myself there, and with one lousy little machine gun. They didn't want to fight the war. My dad was a homesteader, and in 1903 he came to Radisson up across the river, and they had the good years, a few good years, and then, was it 1929?
Yeah, the Depression.
And I was 10 years old in 29 when the money fell all the way from down to nothing. And I was 20 years old when the thing was over. So there was 10 years when you couldn't make a successful living because of demand and stuff. The dollars were just. Do you know what caused the Depression?
Tell me.
No, that's going to take too long. No, I'll tell it in one line. Everybody had the money. The rich people had the money, and the poor guys didn't have nothing. And the rich people weren't spending their money. All of a sudden, the guy said, after 10 years, start spending the money. So the big people started spending the money, and the little guys got the money, and they spent the money, and here we are.
Can you tell me about the struggles that your family faced during the Depression years?
Well, it never got to the point where you threw another gopher in the stew. But you grew everything that you ate. We had a few cattle and a few pigs and a few chickens and a few everything, and we killed everything that we ate. I don't think we were on the farm. The people that were in the cities, I'm not sure how they fared. They were the guys that were really hard up. They might have had their own little gardens, but we never really suffered that terribly much, except for money. My family, of course, were going to sell some of their produce, like wheat. The price of wheat went from about $2 down to 25 cents for the same bushel of wheat. And my folks really couldn't, well, they didn't see any future to it at all.
Before the war broke out, what were you planning on doing with your life?
Well, that's quite a question. What were we going to do? All of a sudden, when the war broke out, everybody started working at this and at that, and all of a sudden there seemed to be lots of money all of a sudden. And before that, we just more or less drifted. I only took a grade 9 education in school. We started working at home. And what do you do? I mean, there was nothing for a young person to do that paid. I could name the book. It's called 10 Lost Years, and it was written. It was written along with a whole bunch of other books. The 10 Lost Years of the Depression, of the terrible things that happened all over the place. That shouldn't have happened at all. That's just the way it's just the way nature goes, I guess.
When you were a small boy, what kind of things would you do for fun growing up, in Radisson?
Well, I used to do a lot of walking. And then one of my brothers said, "Why don't you write something?" And I started writing something. And that was quite a long time ago. But some of those stories, I don't think I'd like to repeat some of them because I wasn't quite sure. I know that one time I wrote a little poem, and I was only about 8 or 9 years old, and I wanted to be very dramatic, so I wrote. There was a polar bear was running across the Arctic sands, and I shot him in the glans. Well, dang it. My mother pointed out to me that there's an awful lot of deserts in the Arctic where polar bears are. She also told me that when a polar bear runs towards you, you don't shoot him in the glans. I went because I didn't know where a gland was, I'm sure. But that's the kind of thing I did. I did a lot of wandering around that part of the country.
And can you explain, you mentioned you only went to grade 9?
Yeah.
Then what happened?
Well, we moved. The depression, my dad got a job 30 miles south. I got a farm, and the whole works of us moved down there. And the 1937 was the word that we moved in 36, and in 1937 there wasn't a thing. There wasn't a thing, for heaven's sake. I think I was 17 at that time, or was I 8? But anyway, the government of Canada, I don't know what they did in the USA, in Canada out here, They give you $5 a month if you worked with a guy. So my brother and myself went out that one summer when there was absolutely nothing anywhere. We worked way off in the North Country where the trees still grew. Apparently, down here the wheat never grew. For $5 a month.
And what was the work you were doing?
Oh, well, a lot of people were moving north at that time, and a lot of the work we did was clearing land of the trees. A lot of the land is worked up there. Let's say, up from Prince Albert especially. From there north, there's an awful lot of farming land, but it was all bush country there was a little clearing here and there, but there was an awful lot of bush country that got torn down at that time.
So just tell me, Mr. Mason, how did you hear about the declaration of war in 1939?
Well, in 1939, there was a real good crop. And my dad bought a car for $400 and some. And we went north to visit our relations. And when we drove in there, they were thrashing. There were us 3 boys, and they had 6 boys. And we drove up to the thrashing machine, and our uncle jumped off of the machine. And, oh boy, he said, we're going to have a family reunion. So we drove to his house, and his wife came out. But she was crying at the time because she had just heard that the war had been declared, and she knew that that carload of boys that went up towards their house, that they were 20 years and about that right army age, all right. But that's how we first heard about it. Was she knew that we were going. Some of those young guys that they were going to have a family reunion. Some of them were going to be in the doggone war. That was the first we heard of it. There was only none of us got killed. I don't think none of us got killed. But 3 of us went overseas, or was it 4? It doesn't matter.
Before you heard about war being declared, were you aware of what was going on in Germany with Hitler, or what the Japanese were doing to the Chinese? Did you know about the world affairs at the time?
Well, anybody read the paper had a rough idea what the paper said, and I guess they said what the politicians said. I've got my own ideas. I've got my own. I used to collect stamps, and in those years of the 20s, there were an awful lot of European people came over to Canada. Well, I guess they came over to the USA too. But anyway, some of those letters just had fantastic numbers, millions of marks, for heaven's sake, to post a letter. Well, good heavens, 1,000,000 marks. So a mark is worth, finally it got to be worth 50 cents apiece for a mark, a German mark. Well, in the 1920s, inflation was so bad in Germany that that's when they changed their government, and all of a sudden, I'm not sure what they did to get all the money, but I know what I think. I think a lot of the people in Germany that had the big money, the same as Metro Goldwyn and Mayer in California, they were all multimillionaires. And so Hitler said to them, "Give us your money." And they said, "Come and get it." So he just killed the doggone Jews and took their money. Here, when we had inflation, somebody said, "Start spending the money." So these a lot of the people a lot of the Jewish people in the USA started spending money too. A lot of the millionaires did, and all of a sudden Germany had all kinds of money from having absolutely less than none. I don't know. Maybe Churchill knew a lot about it. I don't know.
Now, Mr. Mason, so after you heard about the war being declared in 1939, take me through what happens to you and how you ended up in the service.
Well, I suppose I was a kind of a slacker. I didn't join up right away. I joined up quite a bit later. But nevertheless, I didn't think the thing was going to balloon like it did. But it did. It was just, as a matter of fact, Hitler with his super race, as a matter of fact, brought some of them over to New York in about 1936 or 7 or so, and by golly, he brought the what he called the new generation. Like, he brought them over to New York, and they took quite a beating. But imagine, he was kind of proud of the fact that they had changed things around. I don't know what the score is, I'm sure.
Can you just take me through how you got into the service, though, please?
Pardon me?
Can you take me through how you got into the service?
Oh, I think that one thing that pretty near everybody, that lots of guys got in the service, was because everybody else was going. It seemed to be that everybody my age was going. I was about the only guy in the country that, except the guys that obviously weren't gonna. There were quite a few what they called draft dodgers at that time. But I wasn't a draft dodger to my dang sight. I went and joined the army. But it was there was quite a few things. I went a couple of times before I got in, and I realized that I was telling them too much. And I had some diseases when I was a kid, when I was younger. And any of those diseases, you're a no-no in the army. So I just never bothered telling them. Well, for one, I was a mental case. when I was a kid. Well, I had epilepsy. I guess that's the right word for it. I used to have spells that came and went and came and went and came and went, and then he finally put me out of school, for heaven's sake. And, oh, maybe that was a big thing. When the school board, we lived in, it was all country schools at that time, when they said, take that boy out of school. So my mother and father had a library, and they insisted I read all the books in the library. And I think that had an awful lot of change, an awful lot of satisfaction in my life, was the fact that you had read in the books that this is part of the world and that is part of the world, and this is I think that's what we did in the meantime. About that time, oh, what was the name of the guy that flew the Spirit of St. Louis?
Lindbergh, Charles Lindbergh.
Well, somebody took their child. The Lindbergh was kidnapped and killed. And two of the big things at that time, we had a lot of German neighbors, but I forget the name of the guy. They figured he was a German immigrant that had taken the Lindbergh baby and killed it. And there sure wasn't much love lost between Germany and the USA at that time. But of course, Canada was in the war. Well, I don't know. Oh, it's none of my business. And the Japanese, for heaven's sake, all of a sudden attacked Pearl Harbor. And that was more or less the start of that war. Well, I went in, I tried to join the Air Force, first of all. But the second time, for heaven's sake, I tried to join the Army, and somehow or another they got hold of some military records. And the next time I went in, they were so busy. The next time they were so busy that they didn't pay an awful lot of attention to me. You know, I went up there and I rapped on the counter and the guy says, he says to the other guy beside him, he says, you know, if we only get Max Bentley, he said, we can put him in the Army team, in the Army hockey team, and win the game. And to heck with that guy over there, and that was me. I don't think they paid much attention. But when we went to join up, they handed each one of us a list of questions, 200 questions, and we had 2 hours to answer it, something like that. Oh, I don't know. I don't think there was what I think, but it doesn't matter. And so the guy said, "Now look, there's so many questions on here. Oh, let's say there was 120. He says, start at the top and go finish them all. Well, I started the top one and it was easy, and the second one was easy, and the third one was hard, and I thought, to heck, I'll go on to number 4. I went to number 4 and it was easy, and number 5 was a little bit harder. I passed it, and I finally did the whole dang works. And the guy that was with me was stuck on question number 2. He never got past second. And I had an awful good mark, and he had an awful poor mark. And they thought that I was a pretty good guy, I guess, because I knew black from white and that kind of stuff. but I look thinking about those books when I was out of school that year. That I think I took more education from my folks at home than I did going to school.
And so, where did the Army send you then?
You don't want me to answer that, do you? They got me mixed up so doggone bad that they didn't know where I was half of the time. And they put me on the train one time, on the train going west instead of east. For heaven's sake. They didn't know where I was half of the time. And finally I said, dang it, I'm going anyway. So I went over to TS Company, and that is when they sent me west. But when they sent me west, they sent me to Calgary, Alberta. And the guy in Calgary said, well, we're sending the draft overseas pretty soon. You go home for a couple of weeks. So I went home again for a couple of weeks and went overseas. But, and then when I got overseas, they found they didn't have a whole bunch of my inoculations, and they gave them to me, and they put me in right there without joining any more. Oh, pardon me. Boy, this is a dry place, eh? Well, and an O group is like you said, the officers group. And things were going real bad. At least I thought they were going real bad. I don't know what the generals thought. But when I looked into the sky, there was 16. Oh no, less than that. 12. I remember counting at the time. Columns of smoke going up where they had hit tanks. We were just starting in on, I think that it was south of Cleve and Calcar. We were just starting into the Toddenhugel farm battle. And a shell that officers decided that we weren't doing exactly the right thing. So they all decided to gather in one little spot over there. And I suppose it was a mortar shell that landed in between them. Somebody landed a doggone shell right in between the officers. When we went into the Hawkwood Forest, we only had 2 officers out of 2 companies, and there were supposed to be 12. But nevertheless, when we got in there, we had to rely. That's why the books were kind of mixed up. I think the 2 companies went together and formed the one. There was 114 of us went into the forest. I forget how many there was. But there was only 14 of us left when we came out. I don't know whether they got scared and ran out, or whether they got wounded and carried out, or whether they got killed. I don't know. But I know there was just a few of us left. Well, the shell landed right in the middle of them. And it could theoretically have killed everybody, but it didn't. And these 2 guys weren't. And I don't think the rest of them were either, a lot of them. But these two were the two that we noticed the most, because I knew them real well. Cleater and Donaldson. I knew Cleater and Donaldson real well. They were in C Company with us. And the day before that, or the night before that, Donaldson and myself sang a song to get together, and he was a captain. Dear, I want a gal just like the gal that married dear old Dad. Dear, when I think about Donaldson, well, you say Cleater had a false leg. I saw him after the war. Boy, that was really something. And Donaldson, of course, got killed. But, Jim, did you look through those big books at home? Where they had the pictures of all the guys that were the cemetery. Yeah, Uncle Walt and Uncle Bill, and there was about 20 of them. I think there was about 20 of them. It shows a picture. One of them is a picture of Cleater. Cleater got to be a big shot in the Canadian Legion, in the Canadian Legion at one time. And he died a few years ago, about 6 or 7 years ago. Boy, Cleater was something to be. Cleater was something I thought. I had seen Cleater at Cappel's Fair. And he said to the stretcher bearer, he said, "There's a dead guy out there. Go out and get him." And the stretcher bearer says, "I'd get killed if I go out there." And Cleater said, "Hand me your bag and your hat." And by golly, the stretcher bearer handed him his bag and his hat, and it had red crosses on them. Cleater held the doggone hat up, and he walked right out amongst the German army. Well, whoever was still living, and then they never tried to shoot him at all. He went out and he picked up the dead guy and brought him back in. And that dead guy that was out there was from Saskatchewan. And there was an awful lot of guys from Saskatchewan that got killed during the war. I think there was quite a few years before the war started, before D-Day, let's say. That must have been a great big operation, I'm telling you. We didn't land on D-Day, but we sure knew a lot of guys that did. We should have landed on D-Day, I guess, but probably got killed anyway.
So, Mr. Mason, can you take me through, how did you get overseas in the first place? Where was your port of embarkation? And how did you actually get overseas?
What you mean we took off from, what's the name? Halifax, of course. And they only have a couple of, they have one Pier 20, I think they call it, at Halifax. And we went on the Aquitania. I think it was 12,000 guys on that boat. Boy, oh boy, 12,000. Well, there was we came back on the Queen Mary, and there was only 4,000 or 5,000. And there was a whole bunch of Americans. there was a bunch of Canadians and a bunch of Americans. We came back to New York. But we took off from Halifax and landed in England, of course. Well, we went past the north end of Ireland into Scotland. Did you want to listen to that?
Yeah.
There's in the Firth of Forth in Scotland is an island. It is an island that's about 500 feet high, maybe 500 feet high, and when we went past it, you couldn't. The fog was on above the ocean, but you could see the land way up there. That was sure kind of. That was really. There must be pictures taken of that, of the island in the sky. So I said to one of the sailors, I said, what, is there any population on that island? And he said, no. He said, there's just a few Irishmen. There's no civilization at all. Just a couple of Irishmen up there.
And so take me through, after you make it to the United Kingdom, how do you get into France?
Well, how do we get into there? Now, what was the name of that little port? New Haven in south of England. You know where the White Cliffs of Dover stretch along there?
Uh-huh.
Well, there's a crack in it, and that is New Haven. And there's a river flows down there now that the land way back in there finally, I don't know how many thousand years ago or million, that thing cracked wide open. And that's where we took off for France. And then, boy, we went right through the English Channel. And boy, was it ever rough. With about, I don't know, 12, 15, 16-foot waves going by. You kind of, sometimes you couldn't see the boat in front of you or behind you. There were 3 of us took off from there. We landed in France, and by that time, D-Day had changed their supply route at that time. We're now at Dieppe. We landed at Dieppe, where they had a raid a short while before, and there wasn't much left of it because the South Saskatchewans had landed there one time, and when they heard that the South Saskatchewan was coming back again, good heavens, where's? Oh, they're taking a bunch of empties back to haul oil, eh? And there must be an awful lot of oil moving.
So you were telling me where you guys landed in France?
Yeah, we landed at Dieppe, and we went up through, cripe, I forget but we ended up at Antwerp. We landed at Dieppe, and we cut across country to Antwerp. That was quite a thing. Antwerp was pretty well smashed up, but they finally made that a supply route. And sure had cut down all the way, hauling them stuff all the way from France. It was kind of crazy. Of course, the American army wasn't any different. They were kind of crazy too.
So once you got to Antwerp, take me through. Where did you all go, and where did you get your first experience in combat?
We passed through Bergen up Zoom. I think was at, what was the name of the little town? It was in November. the end of November. I thought it was later than that, but actually the book at home says that Laba, his name was Alec Laba, got killed in November. I think it was November the 24th or something like that. I didn't think that was... I thought that Alec got killed in December.
What happened to him?
He got shot right to the forehead and never fell down. He was leaning on the edge of a slit trench. And a bunch of guys, what they had at that time, what the Germans had at that time, and of course, were dogs that could smell a Canadian uniform. And at night time, they were there. The guy, Alec was there looking up at the dike. And there were all the way along, and behind there was a patrol, a German patrol coming along, and they had a dog with them at night time. Well, up here, Alec was looking this way, and there were two drunk German soldiers came walking down the dike, leaning on each other and singing songs in German and laughing and hecking and obviously drunk as old heck, except that when they got close enough, Alec had a Canadian outfit there, and he opened up and he shot the both of them. Good heavens! And they were going to lie down, but as soon as they got down on the ground, some of the guys decided that they would go and take their shoes. And by golly, Alec was at the foot of the dike, and this dog, the patrol was in behind, and he had this pointer dog pointing right exactly at him. And he turned around when they started shooting with their Schmeissers. When they started shooting, he turned around and looked right straight at him. And one of the shells hit him right smack in the middle of the forehead. And I guess it went right between each half of his brain, because he was still groaning away there, for heaven's sake. Alec Laba was the first guy that I remember getting killed. That was along the that was along the river there too. Moss River. That's what they called the Meuse in the First War, the Meuse River. It was the Moss River.
Tell me about Alex Laba. What kind of person was he?
I think he was a Canadian Ukrainian. I think he was a Ukrainian. Although when you have been here long enough, you're just a Canadian, eh?
Tell me about his personality.
Oh, I didn't know Alec that well, but I imagine if a guy had to say anything about the guys that were like him, was aloof, if that means anything. Like, you talk to him when he could talk all right, but he wasn't the kind of a guy who's going to talk to you, especially.
And how old would you say he was when he was killed?
Oh, I think Alec was 29 or something like that. He was older than I was. I think I was about 25 or 6 or 7 at that time. 27, possibly, at that time.
And can you talk to me about your first experience under a German artillery bombardment?
Oh, artillery?
Yeah.
Well, somebody made a mistake and they sent a platoon in without any cover at all. And they just mowed them down. And our guys, and they sent us in next, only they sent a creeping barrage with us. Well, that was probably my first experience with real artillery, with heavy artillery. We had been with the lighter stuff, but our artillery would shoot up overhead and land 100 yards in front of us, and we would go forward 100 yards. And then they would go another 150 yards or whatever it was. And the Germans decided somebody's following that. We will land a whole bunch of shells in behind that. That was my first experience with our real artillery and that's why I'm wearing these hearing aids, I think.
Can you put me in your shoes? What is it like to have artillery shows going off around you?
Well, I'm not absolutely sure of this, exactly how many feet away you gotta be. But when a shell lands within 20 feet of you, it kills you with concussion. But when they landed right there, it seemed to me that they were landed right beside me. But then they must have been more than 20 feet away because they never killed me. But they kept that up until we finished that creeping barrage thing. And then, then everybody gave up. That was the very last day of the Rhineland thing. We were supposed to take a bridge at the south end of the Rhineland, and we fought our way all the way down there. And the Americans were supposed to be with us, but they got tied. They got the tide on the other side of the what do they call that river? They opened the dam in the thing and they let the water rush through. And the Americans were on the other side and they couldn't get across. Or said they couldn't. But that was an awful place. We never used that bridge. The Americans, I guess, and Canadians, as far as that goes, they built five more or less boat bridges. They had an 18 or 20 mile long smoke screen. And they built the bridges and floated. I think they built them along the shore here and floated them out across the river. And they had the other side pretty well saturated with our shells. So when the fellas went across first, they dug themselves in and made a bridgehead, what they call it, on the other side of the river. But meanwhile, a fella came along and he said, "You and I," he said, "are going to Brussels." And I said, "Well, good heavens." I said, "We just nicely got here about 3 or 4 months ago." And he said, "Well, come on." He says, "We're going, you and I." Well, they had signed him and Day and myself to go to Brussels, except for one thing. They put us on a truck, and the guy had a girlfriend in Nijmegen. And he said, "You guys, if you're going to Brussels, you got to bum your way from here. I'm going to go and see my girlfriend." So apparently girlfriends have an awful lot of influence.
So, sir, can you talk to me about what would you do to protect yourself from the German artillery shells?
Well, there wasn't really lie flat was about all you could do. Was to lie flat on the ground, and when they hit the ground, concussion might go up a little bit. It might raise a little bit, but I don't think there was any way to get away from the artillery when they hit near you. Of course, an awful lot of it was wasted, and a lot of it was fired and never hit it. Well, it hit the ground, but there was nobody there or anywhere near. But it was the worst thing, because you didn't know where it was going to come. Like the mortar bombs were there, about 3-inch or 4-inch was their mortar bombs. You could hear them coming. You could hear for about 2 or 3 seconds. You could hear them coming, and you had an idea that they were going to land near you or not be near you. But the artillery shells, especially the 88 shells, the 88 fired its guns. The bullet went way faster than sound. Because when they fired, you could hear the noise of the thing going through the air, but you never heard the explosion until after it hit. And by golly, I don't think that we'd have won the war if Germany would have had allies on both sides. As it is, they had the Russians on one side and the allies, or what they call the British and the Americans on the other side. The two of them were going together. I'm afraid if the Germans would have been these guys, they'd have won the war.
So, can you talk to me more about your job as a signaller? Pretend I don't know anything about it. What does a signaller do in combat?
Well, should I start at the start? Well, yeah, I was trained on the 19 set, which was a great big radio set. But when they told me when we got there, they said, this 18 set is always in a big armored car. And I didn't want to go on. I wanted to go in the infantry. So, like I say, did I not mention before that there was another guy carrying a 19 set? Well, it was a 19 set now, and we had the 16. That's right. And so I traded with him, and he went with the infantry. And the thing was that his radio would carry about half a mile, and I carried his radio right in when the infantry went in, and I was right with them. And you had to say, they're on the right or they're on the left, or where do you want the guys to go? And I was always had an officer right beside me, and he was the guy that said, and I would say, do this or do that, and they would radio it back there, and they would radio the question thing up. Every company had its own signaller, and a company would have maybe 100 Well, it depended how many guys they got in October. The company was supposed to have 100 and some men, and then you radioed message back to the headquarters were maybe 5 miles farther back. Then they radioed out to the other company out there, which was only 200 or 300 yards away. And saved you getting up and say, "Hey, Joe," they're off to your right.
And tell me more about the kind of messages that you would be relaying.
Well, they were mighty short. I don't know what you know. You Bob, I know more about this thing than I do, by dang sight. If you talked on the radio for any more than 3 or 4 seconds, immediately they jammed you. Yeah. That's all you'd hear. So when you gave a message, when they told you, you didn't say, "What'd you say? What'd you say? What'd you say?" And when they talked quick, sometimes it kept you going to remember what they said, though you had a rough idea what they were supposed to do. The enemy would have little devices. I don't know what they're like. Well, you know when you turn your radio on, and there's 2 radio stations. Well, jamming is more or less one playing on top of the other, so it's a kind of jumbled up thing. And so when they said, when they said, "Oh, they're on your right," you said, "Yeah," and that's about all you said, because you knew dang well if you said anything else, they were gonna jam you. You weren't going to get the message across anyway. But that time where I pressed the doggone Pressel switch on the thing, that was the most important time that I ever sent any message, was just by pressing the button, because the guys were over there only a few feet away, and it scared the dickens out of me. Like my radio, you see, your radio works whether you're dead or not. And they knew that I was lying there. And they must have known I was lying there. But my radio kept saying, "How about this? How about that? Da, 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 da." And I wished the heck that they'd shut up. But my radio right on my earphones. I usually had one earphone on and one earphone off. Well, so that was off so I could hear what was going on around me, and this one so I could hear what was going on the radio. And by golly, they kept on asking. And here we were right exactly on top of what was known as the objective. And we were the only guys that back there 10 miles, like I say, we were the only guys that were there as far as they were concerned. As far as they were concerned, we were the only guys there.
How close were the Germans?
At that time? You mean the rest of them, or just those few?
Those few.
Oh, they'd be maybe 15 feet away, 10, 15 feet away. Because I heard the one guy whisper at the other, and he called him Hans. He said, "Hans." You could hear him whispering. This guy I was scared, I'm telling you.
And can you tell me, sir, as a signaler, do you carry any weapons?
Well, I had this little Sten gun. It was it fired 9mm, the same as most pistols fired 9mm. And the Sten gun, everybody got issued with one. It was about that big. It had about that long a barrel. And it fired 25 rounds if you kept cleaning it. Our little machine guns were pretty close. They weren't as good as the German Schmeissers. The Germans had Schmeissers machine guns that fired about 9mm. But the magazine on the Schmeissers, you put the rounds in, and there was a spring pushed. The rounds went one on top of the other like that. But in the Canadians, and the little ones, they were staggered like that. And sometimes when the magazine wasn't cleaned all the time, they would jam. So the Schmeisser had a real good reputation compared to compared to ours. Good heavens.
What was the range of the Sten gun?
I imagine maybe 200 yards, but that's a long. They were made for close-in fighting. I only fired mine about 5 or 6 times, and I cleaned it all the time. And it never ever jammed on me. And I pointed at guys. I don't know where I hit them, but you don't want to get hit by any kind of a bullet, do you?
No.
And that's the whole crazy dang fool thing.
So your Sten gun was like the American Tommy gun, like the Thompson submachine gun.
No, the Tommy gun was way better. The Tommy gun was way better.
In what way?
Well, it fired a larger round to begin with.
Yeah.
And it was more. It had a longer barrel. And the Canadian guys traded, when they were with the Americans right at the start, they traded their Sten guns for Tommy guns because they thought the Tommy guns were a lot superior. Although I never got one myself. I fired one, but that was only in practice. Well, actually we had pouches on our chest. And this thing we had... just for the ammunition for the Bren guns. Carried in their Bren gun magazines were about that long and then kind of curved, you know. And by God, this bullet came along and it hit the magazine in there. And I showed that to Sid, and he looked and he said, boy, oh boy, that bullet went right to... And I don't think he had any idea that it had hit the Bren mag first, and it had gone, and it should have really knocked me down, but it didn't. I guess it hadn't got a full head of steam, but and of course Sid never saw he never paid any attention to the Bren mag at all. But the bullet actually, I think if the bullet would have gone, if there hadn't been any, it might have done some damage. But the way Sid saw it and the way he told about it, That isn't the way it was. The thing hit the Bren mag first.
What did it feel like when the bullet hit you, though?
Well, like somebody hit you with a sledgehammer. Like there's by the time a bullet gets up a head of steam. No, see, I didn't say that right, did I? By the time a bullet gets up enough, it can knock you down. It can really knock you down when a bullet hits you. And I guess I was kind of knocked down on my knees, all right, but I don't remember being flat on my back anywhere. Boy, things.
Did you keep the bullet?
Me, no, heaven. At that time, I think collecting bullets wasn't the main idea.
So,
Said Webb.
what was the strategic importance of Capel G. Vere?
Oh, I thought I told you. They were going to cut off the Canadian Army. If they had come south, if they had met the Germans come see at, what do they call that, the Battle of the Bulge. Well, they only got halfway there, and then they played out. They never made it. So, but if they had made it, and these guys had come, all the Canadian Army would have been in there. Well, there wouldn't. It's their supplies. It was the supplies, because, like they had at that time, they had moved the supply route up from, what did they call that place? To Antwerp. And that cut off 300 or 400 miles. There was a lot of silly stories. There was a lot of little silly stories about that supply route too. Perkins threw that phosphorus grenade, the one I'm thinking about. He threw it and he said, as soon as that thing lands, away we go. And there were only 3 of us ever made it. We were going into Wien. We going into Wien, for heaven's sake, and a guy got knocked over, and by golly, he had a phosphorus grenade right under him, and it exploded. Like whatever I never carried one myself, but it didn't do him any good. That's a sure dang thing. That was at Wien. See, the thing was that we were in this doggone, under this here creeping barrage, and all of a sudden we went past a brick house, and for heaven's sake, there he was. Now, what's the word? But anyway, he said, "Do you think I'll live?" And I said, "Well, certainly." And I said, I forget what I said. He was busy, but maybe that's what Jim was talking about. Because that guy was smoking, for heaven's sake, in the shade of the house, and it was dusk, and I thought, good heavens, what's he doing shaking there? Maybe that's what I did say to him.
How severe was his injury?
Well, that phosphorus that I saw, it started burning. And it burnt and burnt and burnt and burnt. It just kept on and kept on. And, ordinarily you'd think like when you get hot water or falls on you, the water cool off eventually. but apparently phosphorus kept on eating and eating and eating and eating, and he had a quite a chunk. He had a quite a chunk. What the heck was his name? It was a short name. I forget anyway. It was a short name starting with P, I think. Doesn't matter. There was a river past the front of this house, town, and we were supposed to take the town. And they decided to heck with that. We would go to one side and come in from the side. So we left, so there were about, maybe I said 30 or 40 guys guarding the bridge over the river. The bridge wasn't very big, the river wasn't very big either. So we were over there, and we went across it. There was even ice on the river at that time. And we got to water about that high. Boy, oh boy. That's something to walk through that cold, cold, cold water. But we all went through that about, I'd say about 100, maybe 110 guys. No, let's say 100. Anyway, they were all formed going into this town. And meanwhile, the Germans up there, some of the front end went past us. We stopped in this little house. There was a very small house. It only had 2 floor rooms on the bottom floor. We were in this room in here. That's where Fred got killed. And this is where the grenade came in. But anyway, we were there sitting in that little house. We were tactical headquarters. And meanwhile, these guys over here that were protecting the bridge, they heard the people in town start to move. And he figured something happened in the town. So they started back towards the town. And it just so happened that we were in a little wee house there. Well, one of our guys should have known better, but he fired. He saw, when they got close enough, he saw that they were German soldiers, so he fired. Well, immediately the whole dang works up and turned towards that little house. And that's how that's why they figured that TAC headquarters had been wiped out. Well, good heavens, there were still some of us steps living, but they attacked the house, and one of them went by that window and threw in a grenade and just went around the corner of the house, for heaven's sake. And, oh dearie, I think he shot over my head. And Fred was standing behind me. That's the colonel. And it hit him right between the shoulder blades. And he just fell right down, clunk right in front of me there. Died like a chicken. You know, when you cut the head off a chicken, their jaw goes like that. That was a big thing, and it was all because of that one guy firing that gun in the first place. The whole thing wouldn't have happened at all. But anyway, you know, I never thought that pistol was worth anything until a guy told me it's got 1924, I think. Is it 24? It's right in when the Germans weren't supposed to make any guns after the First World War. And that one must have been made in 1924, and the First World War was over in 1919. And I suppose the fact that it was made in 1924, that's why it's so valuable. I don't know.
Just to go back to the story, sir, what happened when the German soldier threw the grenade into the house?
Well, the guys come back from up there, and they just killed him like nothing.
Who's these guys?
They just killed him like nothing.
Who's these guys?
And he came around to the door, and they just wacko. And they said, good heavens. The whole thing shouldn't have happened at all, except that the chief, we always called him the chief, he fired out there, and they just attacked that dang. And he must have been an SS guy, because he was just attacked the house by himself with that one grenade, and threw it in the window and came around to the door just like nothing.
How many men were inside of that room?
Oh, about when he threw, it's a kind of surprising. I think there were about 6, maybe 5 or 6, 5 maybe, in that room.
And tell me, what kind of damage did the grenade do?
Well, I think the 2 guys, French and Brown was their names, I think that the grenade came in and landed there. And I think the 2 of them dived to either to pick it up or to throw it out. And just when they landed on top of it, it blew. And it killed, of course, the most of them. But the other 3 guys weren't. The other 3 guys, and one of them was one of our young officers. And then there was the other radio set, the one that called the guys back from the front, was in that room too. And the guy that, what the heck was that guy's name?
So then how did you end up escaping that?
Huh?
How did you end up escaping from all that? How did you end up escaping from all of that?
Well, the Germans all moved back. And they took 100, I think they take 117 or something like that, prisoners.
Were you in that room where the grenade went off?
No, I was in the other room. Yeah, he just ran around there. Like he came down the left side of the house, he threw his grenade in the window, came around here to the front door, and came walking. He came in there, and I was on my knees on the floor. Fred was standing up, for heaven's sake, and he was shooting out the doggone window, and he was standing straight up. So I guess the thing went over my head. I don't know where it went. It went right smack in between his shoulders anyway. Boy, oh boy.
And then how did you get out of there, Grandpa?
Huh?
How did you get out of there after that?
What happened to that German
Well, you see these guys coming back from the front. These other guys all gave up. They all gave up at the same time. And when I was still kneeling there, and when Ronnie Reid came walking in the door, for heaven's sake, I put in your fire, because I was waiting for somebody to come in the door. And Fred was lying there, and he hadn't breathed his last, of course. Well, and by God, and when Ronnie came in the door, and he says, "What's going on here?" And we all knew the thing was over at that time. And I went out to the door, and here was a whole bunch of prisoners of war that the guys, they knew dang well they were cut off.
So
they had been out there.
So this German soldier that fired and killed Fred, who was right next to you, what happened to that German soldier?
Well, he got hit. See, the house was there, and he went around this side and threw in the window and came around here. And for heaven's sake, what happened to him? He got killed. That's what happened to him. I mean, What would you do? Huh? You know dang well that you're going to be just going to be one of the guys there with your jaws, with your teeth going like that. And you're not, that guy over there isn't going to be around because you're so there was nothing else to do.
Were you by yourself in the room with Fred? It was just the two of you?
Well, I think there were two of us. I think there were two. Now one guy, what the heck was his name? He said that Fred had done this and done that. And maybe he was right. But there was, I'll tell you, there was a little bit of a... No, there was a couple of us, at least two or three. And there were four or five or six in German prisoners of war in the basement. We had put them down there. We picked them up on the way up across the country. And there was some in the basement. And that guy said, Fred went down the basement to see how the guys were getting along, and how they were, because they didn't know we were under attack. And he just came up and shut the door, and he moved in behind where I was, because somebody was, but he was right in front of the dang full window. He was right in front of the window, and that was a bad place. And the bullet never came through the window; it came through the door, smack behind him. Ah, dear.
And so the Luger, the pistol, sir,
Huh?
the pistol itself came off of that German soldier. Is that right?
That was the guy that was lying there, yeah. Well, that's what Wade gave it to me. I'm pretty sure it was Ronnie Wade that gave it to me. That was quite a thing.
What did he say when he gave it to you?
Huh?
What did he say when he gave it to you?
He says that was on the guy. That was the guy that got killed, Fred Waggle. I don't think he said anything more than I remember of. Oh, dear.
And can you tell me about Fred Waggle? What kind of officer was he?
I think he was a real good guy, and maybe had been a real good officer in his place, but they made him the colonel of an infantry regiment, and he made mistake after mistake, and finally the last mistake is the one that he got killed in, because those guys came from behind us, and he knew they were behind us. But we never had any rear guard. And they would have, I think those guys that were behind us would have passed us if the chief hadn't shot out the doggone window and shot at one of them. And that turned the whole dang words towards us. But Waggle himself, he said before that, he had sent a whole bunch of guys in the broad daylight without any cover, and they just mowed them down. And that was his one of his first bad mistakes. Good heavens!
How old was he, would you say?
About maybe 35, maybe 35. He was quite a well known, apparently. But he had been one of those, like one of those guys that had the big radio set in the armored car. He had been, what did they call them? Army officer 1, 2, 3, 4, somebody. They had about 4 of them, and they drove their armored cars here and there and reported to the general how things were going. But he had a big armored car around him all the time, and
I don't think he had a lot of experience in the field. I think.
Who, Fred?
Yeah, I don't think you ask him that.
but
Yeah, go
You
ahead.
asked him.
Grandpa, from what I read, he didn't have a lot of experience in the field, right?
oh no,
Yeah,
not
so
as
that's
an
what he
as
did.
an infantry company. He had never done that before. And you know, when we were in the Hawkwood Forest, he figured the thing that we got to do, the thing that we've got to do is to go. The officers aren't going forward with the men. So by golly, he decided I will do that. So he came way up to where we were, for heaven's sake. And I'll be danged. He drove right up there they came up, brought a tank up, for heaven's sake. And I don't know why they didn't fire the tank. But some guys, a German soldier came walking up right across the valley that was right between us. And he climbed right up there with his Schweizer over his shoulder. And he said, there's a bunch of Canadian soldiers, he said, on the other side of the valley. And he turned his back and walked away with the Schweizer over his shoulder. And the colonel was standing there. Fred Wagle was standing right there, the colonel of an infantry regiment. And he let the guy, we all waited for him to take him prisoner or shoot him or do something. But he just let the guy walk all the way back. Boy, did we get shelled after that. The guy went back and told them over there, that's where they are, is right there. And we took a terrible beating with, they dropped mortars on us. And they still couldn't find out exactly where we were. But you know, the worst thing that happened in that whole deal was when Pringlemeyer, and honestly, I don't know why Pringlemeyer, I looked in the, see, we had a cook, Scorchy McIntosh. And I looked up under the Scorchy McIntosh. No, sir. There was no such guy. And I kind of wonder if the stretcher bearers were under a different name somewhere. Another train. But anyway, Pringlemeyer went out there. They tried to find out where we were. And they sent a guy out there with tracers. And he fired across here. And fired, trying to find out where one of our guys would fire back. Nobody did. They came around and told us to go to sleep. And it's pretty hard sleeping when guys are shooting at you. But anyway, Pringlemeyer, finally a voice out in the dark there said, I'm wounded, help me, I'm wounded. Pringlemeyer was a stretcher bearer, dang it. And he had that red cross on his hat and the red cross here. So he got up on his feet and he said, I'm coming. And he walked right out there and somebody threw a grenade at him, and I guess that was I know that was the end of him. We found Pringlemeyer in the morning. We didn't know. But Pringlemeyer went to help the guy that was wounded. Well, he knew it was nighttime and the guy couldn't see the red cross on his. So he said, I'm coming. Until the guy, somebody killed him. And he went to help the guy. That's what made the whole thing seem kind of silly. the whole thing that you kill people that are trying to help you. I kind of think over the years, of course, I've developed quite an opinion about whether you should be mad at the next guy or not, or whether you should let other people say that guy's no good, let's shoot him. And I think that's silly. But you know what? That's the same guy wrote it 100 years ago. Before that, you're a better man than I am. He who sheds his blood with me and all that kind of stuff will be my brother. You've heard that, haven't you?
Yeah.
We're moving into Wien, and we had the odd tank with us, and the tanks got knocked out as far as that goes. But anyway, we were moving ahead, and by golly, one German soldier, for heaven's sake, let them get too close. And by golly, when they got within maybe 150 yards of him, the guy had, well, most of the tanks had 17 pounders. Most of them had 17 pounders, for heaven's sake. And the guy jumped out of his slit trench and started to run. Is that the guy you're talking about?
Yes.
So the guy ran, and he had just had 17 pounder shells in his big Canon. So he shot at the guy and he hit the ground beside him, and he plowed a whole bunch of and the guy was running twice as fast. And so the guy took another shot at him, and he ran twice as fast again. I suppose he's still living. I don't know.
He's probably still running.
Well, he had to run pretty fast to get ahead of one of those bullets. I've often thought of that guy, except for one dang thing. That tank, they sent a tank in behind, and then they mounted a .5 machine gun on the turret, and one of the guys was standing up, and they hit that dang thing with an 88 or whatever they fired over there. Boy, that was a terrible mess. There was bits of shrapnel went all through that place and smashed everybody up. Axel Hansen and I went out there and looked, and came all the way back. And our sergeant major, no less, said, "You got to go and bring those guys in. They died for you. And you're not going to go out there and bring in dead guys. That's a sure thing." It would have been a nice move, but I saw George after the war. He didn't even remember that. He didn't even remember saying to Axel and I, "Go out there, the guy died for you." More, there was 2 drivers. There were 3 other guys in that tank besides the 2 driver. And boy, they were all mashed up. I'm telling you.
From the 88?
Yeah, well, an 88. The Germans had an 88 Canon. The Americans, the British had a 25 pounder. And the German 88 was practically superior. Like they used the 88 for anti-aircraft, and then that was really something. When they fired in '88, I've had them pass me every now and again. But the guy that fired him would be up there, and the noise that you'd hear would be back here, because his bullet traveled faster than the dog. Well, now why was that? Why was that? You see, when a rifle fires at you from, let's say 100 yards, you hear the bullet go past you, and then you count 1, 2, 3, depending how far away, and then before you hear the sound of the rifle. Well, when they fired them 88s, you never heard a thing up there. You heard the noise back there first. I often wonder why that was. I often wonder why that was, because they fired back here and you heard the explosion back there before you heard it up there. And that's not the way sound travels.
Unfortunately, I'm not smart enough to answer that, so we'll have to move on. Could you please tell me, sir, about your experiences against the German Luftwaffe? Were you strafed by the German planes when you were in combat?
Do you want to laugh or cry?
Why don't we try both?
Well, there was another guy and myself, and I remember him real well. They put a couple of stakes in there, and put a kind of a sacking around it, and then they dug a hole there for another guy and myself were sitting in there minding our own business when one of those planes came along with us, and you can't guess where we went first. We dived into the hole in the ground, and the hole in the ground wasn't made for people diving. Well, that's one experience. When the hole was there to take for a toilet for all the soldiers that had to use the toilet, and it just so happened that we were there at that time, and this plane came along, and we dived for the bottom of that hole, and that wasn't the nicest time. They didn't, the British and the Americans and whoever was with us at that time, they had pretty well air control, and there was hardly anybody ever strafed us. Hardly, because the German Air Force had been more or less knocked out before that. We were only strafed. We're only strafed a couple of times.
So what do you remember about the other time you were strafed? What happened then?
Well, we were going along with a whole bunch of tanks. And all of a sudden those guys used to be way up in the sky, and they'd dive down and come along there. And I think they were, when they came out of the dive, that they were going and putting your speed of sound. But anyway, we were all walking out there. But when all of a sudden I heard them way back there in the column of the tanks, guys all ran like the dickens to get in the shade of the tanks. And of course, by the time they got there, the planes had already gone. I don't know how fast they were going, but I don't remember them hitting anything, except that it was a column of tanks that they were strafing. They might have way back somewhere. But they never hit anybody near us. That was a sure thing, because the guys were only about 20, 30 feet away, and they dived in the front of those tanks.
Can you please tell me about your experiences on patrols? What kind of patrols would you go on?
We went across the river one night. I only went twice. They always sent a signaler across to say, in case you were captured or anything or whatever. And I never made any messages back at all that I know of, that I remember. But one time we just went across the river, and there was a guy walking down the road. He was a German soldier. One of the boys went up to him and tapped him on the back like that. And the guy says, "Oh!" And he thought for the first few seconds, he thought that we were German soldiers, and we were a patrol on the other side of the river. Ah, dear. That was the funniest thing that I remember. Although I knew a lot of the scouts real well, and then the scouts made some terrible trips across the river, and one of them told me, well, they were halfway across the river in a boat, and they started machine gunning them from the far side, and they all had to dive into the water, and they got back to the Canadian side of the river. But every year at a certain time, when he dived into the river, he gets a kind of a pneumonia thing come on him every now and again. Every anniversary of when he had to dive into the Moss River. Oh, it was nice of guys to do the comical thing, or to tell you the comical thing.
Can you tell me about some of the combat patrols that you went on?
The what?
The combat patrols that you went on?
You know what a patrol is, eh?
Well, there are two different types of patrols: reconnaissance patrols and then combat patrols.
Yeah, well, we were just reconnaissance. That's why they sent a signaler along, was to keep track of the reconnaissance, to find out what was going on. Oh, a combat patrol. You know, they tell me, and I'm a young guy compared to the First World War, they tell me in the First World War that they did that, what did you call it?
Combat patrol?
They called them the Suicide Battalion. You just picked up and you went across there with the intention of fighting. And they weren't going to see how things were. They went to fight. And I'm glad they didn't have much of that. Although we had quite a few guys. We had a few guys that went out on patrols. When they heard that Donaldson, I was with him when he got killed. Donaldson took 30 men into a French town when they had just landed in France at the start, and they told the Argylls that the town was empty, and it wasn't. And he brought 20 guys back with him. The other 10 guys didn't come back at all. I guess but then they got up good and close. they got up good and close before they opened up on them. I met a guy in Toronto. Who they Argyle said had been a prisoner of war from the right to start, and he was so drunk that he attacked the whole German army with a machine gun. And that's all. They were to right, and they were to the left, and they were all around. And one of the scouts told me later on, he said, you know, the rumor went around that the Germans were going to issue him with the Iron Cross because he was so brave. And he didn't remember going in there at all because he was so drunk.
You had mentioned that you were with Norm Donaldson when he was killed. Donaldson? Could you tell me that story, please? And who was he?
Well, who was he? Well, he had a wife in Toronto, if that means anything. But Donaldson got to be a captain. And when I was telling you a little while ago, I was telling you about sitting on the guy's foot when I moved back. Well, Donaldson got killed that time. And Donaldson was laying there, and he asked me for a drink. And I took his flask that was tied on him, and here it was pure rum. And I gave him a drink of that pure rum for him. I kind of wonder if that's what killed him. But then somebody fired the doggone shell or the mortar shell that hit him. Donaldson, he was a real good guy. I really liked Donaldson. I almost forgot his name here a little while ago.
What kind of officer was he like?
Well, we had, now that you asked that question, we had a guy, and we started up the doggone hill at Kapellschwer, and he said, I'm not going, because I'm going on leave tomorrow. So he walked back, he stayed back. Well, I was standing in the headquarters. That's where the signalers quite often went to the headquarters. I was standing in there, and Donaldson was sitting there. All of a sudden, he jumped up, and he went behind the doggone door, and he pulled the door. He says, don't tell him I'm here. Tell him I'm gone. And here it was the guy that chickened out the day was going on leave. He was a lieutenant, and he left Perkins, for heaven's sake, to take as it turned out, Perkins and I were the only two that ever came back down off that place. And the other guy there were three of us went up, three of us got there, and Perkins froze his legs right up to his knees. I never got touched at all. They thought, boy, that must be a brave guy that he doesn't get touched. Cripe.
Can you explain what happened during that attack, sir? So what was the objective?
What was the objective? Well, that place had been there since they first moved up there. And the Canadians had attacked it, the first place, and then the Germans took it back. And the Canadians had been attacked it again, and they never made it the second. The Polish people attacked it. The Royal Marine Commandos attacked the dang place. The Algonquin Regiment. No, the general, who was Chris Volks, you've heard of maybe Chris Volks, but he insisted. He says to Dave, he says, that was our colonel, he says, take your men in there. And Dave says, I'm not going to take my men to a death trap like that. And right away they sent him back to England with bad nerves. And so they sent another guy in from the Algonquin Regiment. And they walked onto the doggone place. And there was nobody there. Nobody in sight anywhere. So they stood there in a group talking to each other. And the Germans called their shells down on their own position. They were in the basement they were in tunnels underneath the dike. And they called their own artillery down and they killed, 50-some Algonquins and 5 or 6 of their officers. And that's what would happen to us if Dave would have said, take your boys in there. They just walked in, thought there was nothing to it. It was the German bridgehead. You know what a bridgehead is? The Germans had one bridgehead on this side of the river. One bridgehead. And it was right opposite the main road, going down the main road. And they figured all the time that the Germans were going to come across there. Although they never did. They decided, I forget who the great Canadian was that decided we got to take that place. And Fred Wagle had just taken over. So after all these other guys had attacked, then our regiment attacked. And it took us 7 days. It was supposed to take us a half an hour or an hour to go. But took 7 days. There were...
I mean, can you describe what the German defenses were and what made it such a difficult place to attack?
You want me to... Where are you going to spend the evening? Jim and Jan have a drawing of it at home in one of those books. The place was the dice came along like this and they came out like this to go around the ferry harbor. Well, they had dug in here and tunneled through there so that they had machine guns here and here and here at the top. And then they had tunnels underneath, and they had 4, I think it was, machine guns at the bottom. And they had their own like back across the river. And they had tried to place many times to try and to get it, but you could mortar it and shell it all you wanted. They were down in the tunnels underneath. And they could hear the banging and crashing, all right, but if anybody went up anywhere near, made dang sure that they knew that you knew that they were there. And they were there for, the Germans had that head at Capelle-Chivir for about, 3 months maybe. 3 months, about 3 or 4 months, maybe 4 months. And nobody had been able to take the dang place because no matter how you shelled it or what, they went down underground. When there was an attack on the place, and they came up there and manned their machine guns and stuff. And then when they tried to, when we tried it about the 6th or 7th, no, about the 5th day, I was back there with a radio set on my back, at the back a little ways. There was a voice came on the radio, and it said, "This is the so-and-so, the commander of the German forces along the Moss bridgehead." And then click. There was no more voice at all. And I think the guy was going to give up at that time, except that he didn't. Everybody got killed. They killed every person in that place.
The Germans were all killed.
Yeah. Yeah. There was mostly Germans. There, see, the Canadians got wounded. They got the stretcher bearers took them out, and they went back to the hospital or wherever they went. But the German soldiers, they kept on getting killed up there. And honestly, on the last day, there was a stretch of they cleaned out all the guys that were there the night before when we went up the hill. They carried them all out along with these other guys, and there was a stretch from here to the nurse's room up there, about that high, of dead guys, mostly gray uniforms. There must have been dozens in there at one time. I don't know where all the dead guys came from. But there was an awful lot of them, and they just killed everybody. Well, it's a kind of a. I think we took it. The three of us, the two of us. I think that we went up the top of the hill, and I don't think there were a heck of a lot of guys. I don't think there were a heck of a lot of guys living at that time. I think that they tried to give up at one time, and then they wouldn't have anything to do with it. And either the outfit that went in behind us killed all the guys that were left, or when we left they were all dead. Yeah, I don't know. They thought that was a big thing at the time, but the general thought it was a bigger thing when Fred Wagle got killed. But Fred Wagle, he took charge of that last day or two at Cap-El-Chivir. And I don't think he did too good a job as far as that goes here. One of our lieutenants went up to him and said, "Look it, that's what you've got to do. You've got to move them doggone tanks up there and da-da-da-da." And he was... So by golly, they moved a couple of tanks in there. And I kind of wondered why they didn't go a little bit closer. And I realized why they didn't. The Germans had a thing called the Panzerfaust. Did you ever hear the Panzerfaust?
Tell me about it, though.
Well, the Panzerfaust would fire about, maybe 100 yards, maybe 80 yards or 100, and they hit a tank. They blew the tank up. Like the Panzerfaust was much like what did they call them? The British and Canadians had what was known as the Piat. They had what was known as a Piat, which weighed about an awful lot more than the Panzerfaust. But the reason the tank was staying back was because these guys up any closer, they had Panzerfausts, and they knew they had them. So the doggone tank stayed back a little ways to get out of the range of them. Those things had. No, they had a head on them that exploded towards the point of most resistance. And when it hit the side of a tank, the British and the American tanks had maybe 2.5 or 2 inches of metal. Then some of the German tanks had it 4 or 4.5 inches. But there was an awful lot of Sherman tanks left over in Europe that were knocked out, and the Germans knocked out a fierce amount of they knocked out a fierce amount of Canadian and American tanks.
Do you remember Scotty Mangle?
Scotty who? Nangle?
Scotty Scotty Nangle.
Nangle.
Or Mangle.
Yes. Yeah, he was the guy to my right. He got killed. Scotty Nangle. We started up that dang fool slope. And whatever happened here, I think it was a grenade, I'm not sure. But Scotty was right there, about 4 or 5 feet away, and I see Scotty go down, and the guy to my left got killed. Oh, I forget his name. He came from Alberta. But anyway, when I came roaring down the hill, there was a guy working on Scotty. Scotty Nangle fell right on top of, I think, the grenade. If it was a grenade, it landed right smack in front of him, and he was wounded in quite a few places. And I think he got killed right there. I think he died right there. Scotty Nangle. I hadn't thought of Scotty Nangle for a long, long time. Scotty Nangle. Crepe. What was the name of that guy? There was an awful lot of guys got hit. I don't know how many, but the guys that got killed stayed right there. The guys. I was a reinforcement. Yes, I was a reinforcement. The reinforcement group that I was with, there were about 50 of us. And my sergeant came out and he said, you 10 guys go there, and you 25 go there, and you 10 guys go there, and you 11 guys. And the first thing that I knew, I was standing there all by myself. And I said, and so the guy folded up the thing under his arm, the list, and he started walking away. And I said, hey, Sergeant, how about me? Oh, he looks at the back of the paper. Oh, he says, you're Mason. He says, oh, you go to the Argylls. I says, oh, why do I go to the Argylls? Well, he says, their sergeant major told me that he wanted all the tall men with curly hair. And I had a nice head of hair at the time. I wasn't that curly. But I was at that time, about 5'11" and a half. 3/4. Oh, pretty near 6 feet. So that's how I ended up with the Argylls.
Did you know about the Argylls and their history before you joined them?
No, I didn't. I'm sorry, I should have, but our guys were in the First World War as far as that goes. I didn't know about the history at all until long, long time after. Even after the war.
And tell me, sir, when did you actually join them in combat? What month was it?
Oh, I'd say in combat. Well, I was there when the guy got shot, but I didn't do the shooting. Sorry. About the end of November in 44. Well, at least that was the day that they said that Alec Laba was killed. And I was in the same place that he was on November, I think it was November, the 24th or something. It was late in November. That's what the book said. I thought it was early December, but the book says that he got killed in November, so I was there when he got killed, so it must about the end of November in 44. Well, Jimmy Hall was a lieutenant, and I think in A company, but I might be wrong. But on one of the worst days at Capelchivir, if that is it, Jimmy Hall was leading his platoon up a sloping road down to the top of the dike, but he only got halfway up the road, and he was at the head of all the men when they shot him, and he laid there, for heaven's sake, for everybody to look at for the next couple of days anyway. But Jimmy Hall, according to the other lieutenants, had a $20,000 ring on his finger. And when we picked him up, and it wasn't me, of course, but when they put him on the pile, his finger was cut off. He was frozen stiff, of course, but somebody had cut his finger off in order to take the ring. And that is Jimmy Hall. Well, his father came over to Europe after the war was over, and we had already left to come home in the Far East Force. But when Jimmy Hall's father there, he asked about the ring, and they had to tell him that somebody had stolen the dang thing. That's all that I know about Jimmy Hall. He just laid there for everybody to look at after the first day when he got killed. He just lied there and lied there and laid there, and there was another fellow right a few feet behind him. Oh, I forget what his name was, Ted Rowe or something like that. But they just laid there halfway up the slope, and we were at the bottom of the slope. Everybody had to keep looking at him and looking at him and looking at him, and wondering how long it was going to be before it was you that was lying out there and getting froze stiff.
How were they killed?
Well, that Capelchivir. You mean how they were killed?
Yeah.
Machine gun fire, I think. I imagine that's what hit them. It's hard to tell how they got killed. They sure as heck never got killed in an accident, that's a sure thing. But somebody was shooting at them from up at the top of the dike. And somebody was shooting, and they knocked over an awful lot of guys. The Germans knocked over an awful lot of people. I don't know how many people there were, 300 or 400. Maybe, and of course that didn't include all the German soldiers that were killed. But there was an awful lot of people got killed at Capelchivir. That was the worst dang thing that I think D-Day. There was a lot of people killed on D-Day. And I guess I should have been one of them, but I wasn't there that soon. It was my own fault. I got to be a corporal in Camp Shiloh, Manitoba. And it wasn't in the infantry. I was just had to tell guys how to do it.
Mr. Mason, could you please tell me about Clairot?
Clairot was a Frenchman, by God, but he never spoke he never had an accent at all. He had been in Italy, and he had an Italian machine gun with him. But he was operating a .50 machine gun on top of one of the tanks when another tank, German tank, fired at them, and they hit the gun square on. And he was operating the gun. And you can't guess what happened when that HP hit the doggone gun right in front of his face. They told us to go up and take a look at that tank while it was stopped up there. And I was the only guy that climbed into the dang tank. And there were the guys lying in the tank. And mind you, a couple of them, their heads they didn't have their heads on their shoulders. Because that is like getting shot in the face with a cannon. And they hit the gun right in front of his face. And that was the end of Clairot. Right there. Clairot was an officer, was a lieutenant. Ah, dear.
What kind of officer was he?
He was a good guy, I thought. I thought he was a fairly good guy, because he was one of the guys that stayed out in front with the guys. He didn't like. We had one officer that stayed behind and told the guys to go ahead. And nobody liked him, but they liked Clairot.
How old would you say Clairot was when he was killed?
Maybe about 30, about 35, let's say.
And can you tell me something about his personality? What kind of person was he?
Well, he had just come up from Italy, and he was only with us about, maybe a month. And he was an officer, and of course I wasn't an officer. So I just met him a couple of times, and he was very pleasant to talk to, I thought, at that time. Though that's all I know about Clairot was that he had this Italian machine gun, and he was a nice guy to talk to, as compared to some guys.
And so the German 88 shell hit his tank direct on.
Well, I don't know exactly what. It might have been an 88, but he had the machine gun. And he was shooting at the doggone tank. And the tank shot back at him, and they usually aren't that accurate. But they hit that machine gun right smack on and ruined it, of course. And it killed there were five guys in that tank. And of course it killed all of them. And Axel Hansen and I went up, and I climbed into the tank. And as a matter of fact, I think I pushed Clairot over the edge, but how the heck? The only reason I knew it was him was because that little Italian machine gun, and he had the thing at his side, tied around him with a kind of a belt affair.
Could you?
But when we got back to where our men were, the sergeant major in charge of us, he said, "You got to go up and bring those guys out." And we said, Axel and I, we dang near got killed ourselves on the way out. And we told him that as soon as he went, we were going to be right behind him. Oh yeah. First of all, that tank was on the road, because if the tanks were off the road, there was usually a ditch on each side, and then there was, when they went in the field, it was rainy, and they sank and they had to stop there. They couldn't drive in the ordinary field. So we were running back on the road, and they saw us. The Germans saw us and started dropping mortars on the road. And they kept coming closer and closer and closer. But there was a ditch beside the road with about 3 feet of water in it. And I jumped into the ditch, and I tried my dangest to stay in the bottom of that 3 feet of water. They missed the water. If the German, if they would have landed in the water, it would have killed me concussion. But they landed on the road, and you could feel the ground shake underneath you. And when we got back, when Axel and I got back a little, there was a bit of a broken down house there, and all of a sudden we could hear the noise of. They were dropping. They fired away up in the air, and they came down. We could hear the whistle, and we jumped right through a doggone window in that house. I often wonder how we got through there and never got hurt at all. We landed in the house on top of each other. And the bomb hit the top of the house, and I guess moved some of the shingles or damaged the roof a little bit, but it didn't come all the way down. Those are two of the two worst things that happened to us on the way back. Of course, you get a little bit used to. You get a little bit used to guys shooting at you, and you could hear the odd one go past you. You could hear it, unless it was real close. When it was real close, it sounded like a small rifle going. But when it passed you about 6, 8, 10 feet away, well, you just kept on going, and there was a lot of that happened, of course, but those are the two things that bothered me the most at that place. But right away we had to move out of there.
So could you, I really appreciate you telling me that story. You did a great job. Could you please tell me, though, if Claireau, if he was an infantryman, what was he doing in the tank?
Well, we were riding on the tanks. Some of the guys we were attacking down near Exanton by starting with an X. And a lot of the infantry guys were riding on the tanks. And he was riding on the top of what they call a kangaroo tank. And a kangaroo had a big machine gun mounted on it, and room for infantry inside. And there was only five guys in it when Axel and I went up there. There was only 5 guys, and they were all killed. They were riding in this kangaroo tank. I think they took a Sherman tank. I think they took the Sherman tanks and took the big guns off of them, the 17-pounders or whatever they've had. I don't know whether I ever saw a Sherman tank with a 25-pounder on it. I think they usually had what was known as a 17-pounder. I think they were something like 17 or 18 or 19 or 20 millimeter shell. The German big guns fired what they called a 28, and that's 28 centimeters. 28 centimeters. That's about 4 inches or 3 inches.
And so this kangaroo that Clairo was in, they were hit by a German tank that was in the vicinities. It was a German tank, correct?
No, it was a British. It was an American tank, a Canadian tank.
No, the one that hit them, the one that fired the shell.
Oh, it was a German. It was a German. It must have been a German. I don't know what absolute. I don't know what size of a rifle or gun they had, but they hit that thing with a gun.
But it wasn't an anti-tank gun. It was an actual German tank that did it, correct?
Oh yes. As far as I was, they had a whole line of tanks and men around Wien. They like Wien was there where you were sitting, and the tanks were down about where I'm sitting, a few hundred yards, maybe half a mile. No less than half a mile. And they were the Exanton Bridge was there, and the whole idea of the army was to go down and take that bridge, so that the Germans couldn't get back across the Rhine River. And then, of course, while they filed in there and went across the bridge, the German army going backwards across the river, these people were what they're called the rear guard. And they all of a sudden, at that time, they all gave up. Except we had quite a time before they gave up. But the rear guard, for heaven's sake, when the last Germans had got back across the Rhine, the rear guard wasn't needed anymore. So a lot of them just gave up right then. That's how come all them tanks and stuff were out there. The Americans were south, and they came. And the Americans came up they crossed the Ruhr, what the heck was the name of that? The Germans had opened a flood and wouldn't let the Americans come. And they had to wait. And when they finally were coming, they were coming down the road, quite a few hundred of them. But the book says that the German, this here rear guard, the book says that the rear guard just knocked them one after another at this hundreds of shells. There must have been quite a to-do there. But the Americans didn't know where they were at exactly. They ran out of. They didn't know exactly what part of the world Germany they were in, but they were coming north, and they didn't know that back here was a whole bunch of 88s, and they just paraded right across in front of them, and they just knocked a whole bunch of them. One of those books that Jim has at home there, The Guns of Victory, I think. It says the German officer in charge said that they lost 250 at Wien. They just shot them down like pigeons. They just shot. They never fired back hardly at all because they didn't know exactly where the other guys were, and they just went driving right by them, and they fired on them. And that must have been quite a deal. We spent, maybe 7 weeks going down the Rhine, trying to save that bridge so that the Germans couldn't go across it to get back. And when we got there, for heaven's sake, they had blown the bridge up. And all the Germans had gone back across it except that rear guard. They stayed on this side, quite a few hundred of them. Well, 100 of them anyway. I personally had the job of taking them back to TAC headquarters. About 50 of them. And I was the only guy who had that little wee small machine gun. And they were all wanting, the German soldiers were wanting to give up. They didn't want to fight at all. They were the rear guard, and their job was to protect the bridge until they got across. Then they just gave up. And those guys weren't a bit, they didn't want to fight anymore at all.
Mr. Mason, thank you for explaining about the German rear guard actions. Could you please tell me about what happened to Major Mac Smith?
Mac Smith?
So who was he?
Mac was in charge of information. That was his job, was to find out. I was talking to Mac when we went into, what was the name of the town? Anyway, and he said, we know exactly where we're going tomorrow. And I said to him, what the heck? Who told you? He said, the civilians told me. He said that the people in the town knew more than he did about what was going on. And Mac Smith got hit at Capel-Chivir. He shouldn't have been there, but he was, and he got wounded there. But we moved about maybe 60 or 80 miles over the Rhine River, and we came to the Ems River and the city of Meppen. And by golly, they had blown the bridges across the Emden River too. So the bridge was just sagging down into the water. But Mac was standing there watching the guys. They had a kind of a ferry affair, and they ferried the guys across the river. And he was just standing there, and a guy on the other side of the river shot him right through the head.
Who?
A German sniper, or, well, whoever it was. It was somebody on the other side of the river shot, and he was the only casualty in the Canadian Army crossing the Ems River. And he was standing there looking at them, equipped this here ferry affair. And by golly, across the river, the German sniper just took a shot at him and shot him right through the head. And that was the end of him.
What was the highest award for valor that you received in combat, Mr. Mason?
Who, me?
Yes, sir.
I didn't deserve it. And there was a lot of guys right here on 4 feet there and 3 feet there that got killed. And how the heck can you say that a guy that never got killed was brave? That's baloney.
Well, just tell me, Mr. Mason, what was the highest award for valor you received?
That I received. Well, well, they call it the military medal.
And
They don't call it that anymore, but I never ever felt like I deserved having it because I think that one of the reasons they gave it to me is because I was with some important people when they got killed, and there was an officer there. There was always usually an officer there that said, "Oh, Mason didn't get killed. Mason was there and he was shooting at these other guys, and they didn't kill him. So therefore, he must have been awful brave, eh?" Cripe. I was home. I'm glad to be home, of course. And we lived at Tessier at the time, and I was walking between the house and the stable at our farm, and all of a sudden my dad said, came out of the house, he said, "Your picture is in the paper." And I had no idea. I had no idea at all. And I picked up the doggone paper and looked at it, and it said what a great guy I was. Ah, dear whiz. Well, I wasn't a great guy. Two officers saw me. Well, they saw me keep on living when other guys were getting killed.